Okinawa Spring, 1945. A small island, but became the stage of the bloodiest battle in the Pacific, where every inch of land was paid for with human lives. Here, the U.S. Marines and Army had to face one of the most formidable and thorny defense systems of Japan. More than 100,000 Japanese soldiers were entrenched in hundreds of underground tunnels, forts, bunkers, and were ready to fight to the death at any time. For 82 days, the rain poured down, the rocks turned to mud, the artillery bombarded day and night, and kamikazes plunged into the sea like desperate knives. The casualty statistics showed that this was an extremely brutal and bloody war. Okinawa became the most vivid nightmare of the Pacific War. American soldiers, from Marines' Army tank battalions to frontline medics, experienced breathtaking life-and-death moments from the landings on Hagushi Beach, the Battle of Shuri Line, to the fierce fighting in the dense maze-like caves. Okinawa was more than just a battle. It was the ultimate warning of the extent of the cruelty Japan was willing to endure against the Allies, and also the direct cause of the strategic decisions that would change world history soon after. The Battle of Okinawa, or Operation Iceberg, was the bloodiest battle in the Pacific and also the largest amphibious landing the United States ever made in the entirety of World War II. It was an 82-day battle from March to June 1945. A war that tested the courage, endurance, and determination of American soldiers to their utmost limits. Okinawa was the key to opening the door to mainland Japan. Therefore, the U.S. military threw the most powerful force in the Pacific. But the Japanese also knew that if Okinawa was lost, the road to Tokyo would be completely open. They turned the entire island into a giant fortress. A system of underground bunkers, defensive guns, and sniper positions strategically placed to inflict maximum casualties on the Americans. The result was a battle of unprecedented horror and bloodshed, according to casualty reports. Japan lost 106,000 men, of whom more than 77,000 were killed. The U.S. suffered more than 75,000 casualties, of which more than 20,000 were American soldiers killed, not to mention another 26,000 soldiers who were sick or psychologically injured, a number far exceeding many battles in Europe. And most tragically, tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians caught in the crossfire died or committed suicide in despair. Okinawa was more than a battle. It was a stark reminder of the price paid for ultimate victory in the Pacific. And it was here that the world witnessed the uncompromising fighting spirit of the U.S. Marines and Army, who fought under heavy fire for nearly 3 months to complete their mission. The Ryukyu Islands are located south of Kyushu, the last gateway before touching the Japanese mainland. Of these, Okinawa is the largest island, stretching nearly 100 km, although only 4 kilometers wide, but possesses a rare strategic position large enough to build many large airports. Deep sea water perfect for building military ports. Located at the intersection of East Asia, between China, Taiwan, Japan, controlling the entire regional sea route. In 1879, Japan annexed Okinawa, but the indigenous Ryukyu people were still treated as colonies. Okinawa's climate is subtropical, hot, humid, rainy, and prone to typhoons. These weather conditions would soon become the second enemy of the American Army in battle. When the U.S. Marines captured Iwo Jima in March 1945, after more than a month of fierce fighting, they were close to Japan's last line of defense. And the next target, the most important target before attacking the mainland, was Okinawa. By capturing the island, the United States would have a huge naval base near Japan, possess many strategic airfields close enough for B-29 long-range bombers to continuously attack Japanese cities, open the way for the planned invasion of the mainland, a campaign that could decide the end of World War II. After the first 3 years of the war, the Japanese forces in Ryukyu numbered only about 600, but when the threat of an American invasion became clear, the Japanese Empire rushed to turn Okinawa into its last bastion. By April 1944, the 32nd Army was deployed with 3 main units: 9th Division, 25,000 troops; 24th Division, 14,000 troops from Manchuria; 62nd Division, 12,000 troops with battle experience in China, with the 44th Mixed Brigade with 5,000 troops. There were also 9,000 naval troops at Oroku Base, but most were not trained in land warfare, an armored regiment with 14 medium tanks and 13 light tanks. Native forces were also mobilized, including 39,000 Ryukyuans, including 24,000 Boitai militiamen, 15,000 laborers, 500 high school students, and 600 medical students. In total, Japan had more than 100,000 troops preparing to stop the largest American attack in the Pacific. Commanding the entire defense of Okinawa was Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, along with his Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Cho Isamu, and Colonel Hiromichi Yahara, who designed the wear and tear defense strategy to prolong the war. Predicting that the Americans would land on the west coast, Ushijima did not choose to fight on the beach. Instead, he concentrated all his forces south around the capital Neha, and especially the Shuri Line, a fortified network of Rocky Mountains trenches, underground fortifications, and interconnected tunnels. This was where the 24th and 62nd Divisions were assigned to defend the island. The northern part of the island was held by only 2 weaker battalions, while the southern end was defended by the 44th Brigade and a division-sized force. By March 1945, the entire defense system was complete, a fortress that the Japanese believed would cost the United States the most in the entire Pacific War. The American force fighting on Okinawa was the 10th Army, commanded by Lieutenant General Simon Bolivar Buckner. Under him were 2 main corps: General Roy Geiger's 3rd Marine Corps, including the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions, and General John R. Hodge's Wissenfreit 3rd Corps, including the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions. In addition, the reserve and support forces also included the 2nd Marine Division, the 27th Division, and the 77th Division, bringing the total U.S. force to more than 208,000 soldiers. As General Ushijima had predicted, the U.S. chose Hagushi Beach on the west coast to initiate the landing. Meanwhile, the 2nd Marine Division conducted a diversion at Minatoga in the southeast, distracting the Japanese defenses. Offshore, the Allies brought to Okinawa a huge naval force, 1,600 warships, including 40 aircraft carriers, 18 battleships, 32 cruisers, and 200 destroyers, one of the most powerful naval formations ever seen in World War II. The U.S. Navy was responsible for both the preparatory bombardment and the transport of 183,000 troops and 747,000 tons of equipment and weapons, using more than 430 transport ships from all over the Pacific. While the U.S. Air Force was largely based on aircraft carriers, the Japanese relied on kamikaze tactics, now the mainstay of their defense. From the day the U.S. landed on April 1st to May 25th, Japan launched 7 kamikaze campaigns with 1,500 suicide planes, causing heavy losses to the U.S. and Allied navies. The first steps of the U.S. troops into Okinawa began on March 26, 1945, when the 77th Infantry Division landed on the Karama Islands, 24 kilometers west of Okinawa. After 5 days of fighting, the Karama Islands were declared secure. The U.S. lost 31 men, 81 were wounded. The Japanese lost 530 men, and 121 were captured. This attack gave the Allies an important anchorage and eliminated the threat of suicide boats. However, tragedy still occurred when more than 200 civilians were killed, and many chose to commit suicide. On March 31st, the Marines continued to land on Kaiseshima, setting up a 155-meter artillery position to prepare to support the main campaign. At dawn on April 1, 1945, L-Day, Coinciding with Easter, the largest amphibious operation in the Pacific began. American naval gunfire pounded the shores of Hagushi from 5 a.m., while hundreds of landing craft lined up offshore. At 8 a.m., the Americans came ashore, and surprisingly, there was no resistance. In stark contrast to Iwo Jima or Tarawas, 50,000 American troops were ashore within hours. By evening, 60,000 along with tanks and heavy weapons. The first day's casualties were extremely low, 28 killed and 27 missing. The 10th Army quickly took Kadena and Yomitan airfields. Resistance was so minimal that American commanders knew the Japanese were preparing something bigger in the south. Over the next 2 days, the Americans advanced from the west coast to the east coast, splitting Okinawa in two and seizing 2 of the 5 key airfields. As they entered the village of Shimabuku, the Americans were greeted by 2 elderly villagers who told them that more than 300 villagers remained a rare moment of calm before the approaching storm. April 1945. Operation Tengo was the last desperate effort of the Imperial Japanese Navy. After heavy losses in the Philippines, the Japanese fleet was nearly crippled, but when Okinawa was attacked, they launched a suicide force to draw the attention of the U.S. Navy, opening the way for kamikaze airstrikes from Kyushu. On April 5, 1945, Admiral Toyota ordered Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito to lead the Second Fleet, consisting of the super battleship Yamato, the cruiser Yahagi, and 8 destroyers, straight to Okinawa on a one-way trip without enough fuel to return. On the afternoon of April 6th, the fleet set out, but at dawn on April 7th, it was discovered by the U.S. That afternoon, more than 386 U.S. aircraft from aircraft carriers launched a massive attack for more than 2 hours. Yamato, the last pride of the Japanese Navy, was sunk with 2,498 sailors. Yahagi and most of the destroyers were also destroyed. Only 3 Japanese ships survived. Vice Admiral Ito died with the flagship. With the destruction of Yamato, the Japanese Navy considered its surface power to be over, and Tengo became a symbol of the complete collapse of the naval force that had once terrified the entire Pacific. After a week of smooth marching, the 7th and 96th American Divisions advanced south of Okinawa, where the Shuri Mountains formed a natural fortress. The limestone terrain full of caves and underground fortifications made this the strongest line of defense for the Japanese. The 62nd Division held the main line while the 24th Division served as a reserve. Upon reaching the area, the Americans were stopped at the Cactus Kianiku and Tombstone Heights, where the Japanese fought with great tenacity. The pinnacle, the strategic position where Admiral Perry had planted the American flag in 1853, was only captured after 3 days of bloody fighting. The Americans suffered about 1,500 casualties, while the Japanese lost 4,500. Shuri Ridge had officially opened. The Americans' next objective was Kakazu Ridge. The 383rd Regiment of the 96th Division attacked on April 9th, but was repeatedly pushed back by Japanese fire. It was not until the 12th that the Americans finally took the high ground at a heavy cost, for 51 dead, and the Japanese nearly 5,800. In the east, the 7th Division advanced slowly due to the difficult terrain and the tenacious Japanese resistance. When some Japanese generals wanted to counterattack, Colonel Yahara objected, warning that they would be crushed by superior American firepower. But General Ushijima ordered a counterattack. On the night of April 12th, the 22nd Regiment attacked from the east, the 63rd Brigade, and the 272nd Battalion from the west. However, poor coordination and overwhelming American firepower caused the Japanese to fail, losing thousands more soldiers, forcing many units to do the unthinkable retreat. While the ground burned, the Japanese launched a massive attack on the American fleet offshore. On the morning of April 13th, the same day, the Americans announced the death of President Roosevelt, 185 kamikazes, Zero fighters, and torpedo bombers simultaneously attacked the Fifth Fleet. This was also the first time the OKA suicide bomb was used. The destroyer Manert El Ebil was sunk, and many other warships were hit. That evening, Japanese propaganda loudspeakers broadcast a chilling threat. Roosevelt's death is the beginning of the American tragedy, and it will happen right here on Okinawa. The Emperor's special forces will sink you. Prepare to lie down with the grass and trees here. While the Southern Front was held back at Shuri, the American advance in the north was much faster. The 6th Marine Division crossed the rugged mountain terrain to attack the Marabu Peninsula, where the Japanese had only 2 battalions entrenched on the 400-meter-high Yaitake Peak. The battle lasted 4 days, and by April 18th, the Americans controlled the area, killing about 700 Japanese soldiers. The rest retreated south or went into hiding to fight as guerrillas. Some Okinawan civilians were also drawn into the fight, causing further damage and sabotage to American installations. The 6th Division suffered 1,037 casualties before being replaced by the 27th Division on May 4th. West of Motobu was Ashima Island, a strategic target with an important airfield. On April 16th, the U.S. 77th Infantry Division landed and encountered fierce resistance from kamikaze Japanese militia to armed women. After 3 days of fierce fighting, the island was captured on April 21st. Japanese casualties were more than 4,700, of which 500 were militia. Nearly a third of the population was killed. The U.S. lost 118 troops, including the famous war correspondent Ernie Pyle, who was killed by machine gun fire on April 18th, and whose memorial was erected by the 77th Division. At the end of April, the 77th Division was sent back to Okinawa, while the islanders were temporarily evacuated to allow the U.S. to build an air base. After nearly a month of fierce fighting around Shuri, the Japanese still held out successfully. On May 1st, in a command bunker at the foot of Shuri Castle, the Japanese generals held a meeting to decide the fate of the entire campaign. Commander Ushijima and Colonel Yahara advocated a prolonged defense to wear down the Americans, while General Cho and the warmongers wanted to launch an all-out counterattack. The result, they agreed to launch a major attack after 2 days of preparation. The Japanese plan was ambitious simultaneous attacks on land and at sea. On land, 2 prongs, the east and west, supported by tanks and artillery, would penetrate the American defenses. Another prong would cross the Maida Range and attack the center, while landing units would secretly circle behind to cause chaos. At sea, kamikaze waves from Kyushu would attack the American fleet to weaken the supporting fire. On the afternoon of May 3rd, Japanese artillery began to pound the American lines. Offshore kamikazes sank the destroyer, Little LSM 195, and damaged several other ships. At midnight, the Japanese sent 2 landing parties around behind the Americans, but both were detected and almost completely destroyed. At dawn on May 4, the real counterattack began. On the west flank, 2,000 troops of the 44th Mixed Brigade made a daring charge across the open area, but American artillery fire crushed the formation in the first minute. On the east flank, Japanese infantry supported by tanks advanced the furthest, but most of the armor was destroyed when the Americans used armor-piercing shells. Despite having only 9 tanks left, Captain Ito led 600 troops to Tanabaru, a desperate but determined effort. The Maida advance was also stopped. By noon on May 5th, reports from all fronts indicated that the entire counterattack had failed. Ushijima was forced to order a retreat. The Japanese suffered terrible losses. Some 60,000 men had been taken out of action since the start of the Battle of Okinawa, rendering the Shuri Line untenable. The Americans also paid a heavy price. Some units lost more than half their men in just a few days. The 307th Regiment alone lost 8 company commanders in 2 days of fighting. But despite the bloodshed, the Americans still maintained the initiative, and the Maida Range fell into their hands. After the defeat, the Japanese urgently consolidated their remaining forces. The 62nd Division, now down to 1/3 of its strength, defended the western flank. The 24th Division held the rest of the line, and the 44th Mixed Brigade, despite heavy losses, was ordered to continue fighting to the last man. The Battle of Okinawa entered its final phase, desperate, brutal, and with no way out for the Japanese. After the Shuri Line began to falter, the 3rd Amphibious Corps took over the 1st Marine Division on May 7th. A day later, news of the German surrender boosted American morale, prompting the 10th Army to launch a new major breakthrough on May 11th. The 4 American divisions were assigned clear tasks: the 96th Division to capture Conical Hill, the 77th Division to attack Shuri Castle, the 1st Marine Division to attack the Dakshiwana defense cluster, and the most difficult, the 6th Marine Division to capture Sugarloaf Hill, a low point, but turned into a continuous fortress by the Japanese, with 5 elite battalions and dense anti-aircraft artillery. The attack was slow but steady. The 2 central divisions were stopped, while the 6th Marine Division faced a veritable hell at Sugarloaf. From May 14th, after crossing the Ada River, the 22nd and 29th Regiments continuously attacked but were repelled. Each assault was crushed by fire from underground caves. It was not until May 18th, after the U.S. moved 3 tanks into the position of blocking the cave entrance, destroying the Japanese troops from the moment they emerged to counterattack, that the Marines took the summit and gradually controlled the entire area. But the price was extremely high: 662 casualties, plus more than 1,200 completely exhausted men. In other directions, the fighting was equally fierce. The 1st Marine Division completed the Dakshiwana objective on May 14th and approached the Shuri defense line. The 77th Division, after a series of bloody battles, broke the chocolate drop. Wart Hill, flat-top system, but many companies had lost up to 85% of their troops. Their next objective was Ishimi Peak, the gateway leading directly to Shuri. On May 13th, the 96th Division and the 763rd Tank Battalion captured Conical Hill, a key high point on the eastern flank of the defense line. By May 19th, the 7th Division was back in action, capturing Yonabaru faster than expected because the Japanese had been severely weakened. These successive successes allowed the Americans to close the encirclement around Shuri on May 21st, despite torrential rains slowing the advance. Taking advantage of the bad weather, General Ushijima made the most important decision since the beginning of the campaign: withdraw all troops from Shuri to preserve their strength instead of holding out to the last man. With news that reinforcements from the Japanese were almost impossible, Ushijima was forced to choose: either die to the last man at Shuri, or retreat to Chinen, or retreat to the Kian Peninsula. In the end, he chose Kian, where ammunition depots and stronger fortifications had been prepared. Under heavy rain, the Japanese secretly withdrew the 62nd Division left on May 25th, and also organized diversionary attacks to deceive the Americans. The 24th Division withdrew on May 29 to establish a new defensive line at Itoman. On the night of May 26, the Ushijima command left the Shuri Caves. Although the Japanese continued to engage in sporadic fighting at Shuri for another week, in essence, the Shuri Line, the heart of the entire Okinawa defense system, had officially collapsed. On May 25th, to support the withdrawal from the Shuri Line, the Japanese launched their 7th and largest kamikaze attack on Okinawa. Over the course of 12 hours, 176 suicide planes attacked the American fleet, sinking USS LSM-135 and severely damaging several other warships. At the same time, 5 Japanese twin-engine planes unexpectedly penetrated American air defenses and one landed at Yontan Airfield, where the suicide squad destroyed 7 American planes, damaged 26 others, and set fire to 2 giant fuel tanks, one of the most daring incursions of the campaign. Despite the heavy kamikaze damage, the British Navy completed its mission of blocking and neutralizing Japanese airfields from late March to April. During the entire Okinawa campaign, the Japanese launched 1,900 kamikaze sorties, but were shot down nearly 90%. The few successful breakthroughs, however, still inflicted terrible losses. 30 American ships sunk, 223 damaged, including several large American and British aircraft carriers. Okinawa alone accounted for 1/7 of all U.S. Navy casualties in World War II. The Japanese cost even more, some 4,000 aircraft, and nearly all of their kamikaze pilots. But despite desperate efforts, they could not turn the tide. As the Shuri Line collapsed, General Ushijima ordered a retreat to the last line of defense, a rugged mountain range overlooking the East China Sea. On May 29th, U.S. Marines took Naha. Shuri Castle, held by only a few hundred wounded Japanese, fell quickly after 3 days of bombardment by the battleship USS Mississippi. In early June, U.S. forces attacked the Oroku Naval Base, where 2,000 Japanese naval soldiers were holed up in caves. Completely surrounded, Rear Admiral Minoru Ota sent a suicide telegram and committed seppuku along with his staff officers. By June 14th, the base was completely destroyed. At this time, the Japanese 32nd Army had only 30,000 troops, left lacking ammunition and weapons. On June 15th, the 27th Regiment held a disbandment ceremony. Regimental Commander Kaneyama committed suicide in a traditional ceremony, calling on his subordinates to live to tell the story of the battle. On June 18th, tragedy struck the American side. General Simon Believer Buckner, commander of American forces in Okinawa, was hit by mortar shrapnel and died, the highest-ranking American officer to die in World War II. By June 21st, Okinawa was declared secure, but in some places, Japanese troops continued to fight to the last breath. On June 22nd, in the command cave at Mabuni, General Ushijima and General Isamu Cho adjusted their uniforms, wrote a letter to the emperor, and then performed harakiri. General Ushijima charged Colonel Yahara to live to tell the whole truth of the Battle of Okinawa. Yahara was the only senior officer to survive, and later wrote The Battle for Okinawa, the most important account of the battle. On July 2nd, the Battle of Okinawa officially ended, closing the bloodiest battle in the Pacific. After a battle lasting nearly 3 months, the final victory belonged to the Americans. Both the Japanese and American sides suffered heavy losses. The Americans suffered more than 75,000 casualties, with the Marines losing nearly $3,000, the Army losing more than 4,600, and the Navy suffering heavy losses due to kamikaze attacks, nearly 5,000 killed and nearly 5,000 wounded. This was the bloodiest battlefield for the Americans in the Pacific, and the second highest casualty battle for the Americans in the entire World War II, after the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. In terms of equipment, the Americans lost more than 225 tanks, 763 aircraft, 36 ships sunk, and hundreds of other ships damaged. Even the British fleet suffered significant losses, with 98 aircraft and many sailors killed. The Japanese suffered catastrophic losses. More than 100,000 troops were killed, including regulars and Okinawan militia. Only about 7,400 were captured alive, a rare number in a Pacific battle, as most Japanese troops usually fought to the end. Japan also lost 1,030 aircraft, 27 tanks, and 16 warships, including the super battleship Yamato. The tragedy also resulted in the deaths of more than 122,000 Okinawan civilians, many of whom died from bombing, starvation, or forced suicide by the Japanese military apparatus. Okinawa became the clearest demonstration of the terrible price that the United States would pay if it invaded Japan, and it was these bloody numbers that contributed to the final decision to end the war as quickly as possible. With the Americans capturing Okinawa, the last line of defense against Japan had been breached. The U.S. now had a major naval and air base just over 500 km from Kyushu. A massive construction project was launched on the island, mobilizing 87,000 engineers to build 22 airfields for the 8th Air Force from Europe and for U.S. Marine and Navy Air Forces. From then on, air raids on Japanese territory increased greatly. A naval base was established at Batenko at the southern end of Buchner Bay to control the ports at Nahachimu-wan, Nago-wan, and Kachin-Hanto. Two terrible typhoons in September and October caused so much devastation on the island that the naval base had to be moved to the southeastern tip of the Kachin Peninsula, which is still known as White Beach. Okinawa became the site where U.S. Marines and Army troops prepared for Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan that ended the war. And that was the entire development of the most fierce and bloodiest battle on the Pacific battlefield. If you like it, don't forget to leave a like. YouTube algorithm will bring the story to more people. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We have many untold stories, forgotten feats, and people who deserve to be honored. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. You are not just a viewer. You are also a living book that stores these stories forever. See you again in the next historical journey.